influences is Aalto University. So and Lauri Järvilehto comes there, and it's nice that we get a view to the creativity and what's happening there. So Lauri will tell a little bit more about Aalto. But Lauri is now a professor of practice there at Aalto University. He is running the Aalto Ventures program, which is the educational program for the whole university about the entrepreneurship activities. Besides that, there is also Aalto Entrepreneur Society, which is student-led thing. So, but now this is more the institutional part what Lauri does. But he has a background of entrepreneur too. He has been putting many companies on. He put, for example, Academy of Philosophy. That was one of his things, I think 10 years ago already. And then some digital companies, what he's running. He's also in UNICEF Finland, and then running this program at Aalto University. And also he's a musician, an artist. So that I think that Lauri is quite interesting person. And now I would like to give the word to Lauri and tell a little bit about you and then your story.
Thank you, Kari. So yeah, hello everybody. Really great to be with you here in this new kind of weird world we're living. So yeah, my name is Lauri Järvilehto, and I'm a professor of practice at Aalto University, and like Kari said, I'm the co-director of Aalto Ventures program, which is in charge of the entrepreneurial education happening inside Aalto University. So before I go into the actual topic at hand today, which is the philosophy of creativity and entrepreneurship, I would love to tell you a little bit about like, how Aalto University is structured now, and why creativity and entrepreneurship are both very important themes for us, and also how we at the AVP Aalto Ventures program are driving these themes inside the university. So like Kari said, I've been involved in a bunch of different types of endeavors. So the weird thing is I've now been a little more than a year at Aalto, and this is actually, so I'm 42, and this is the first day job I've ever had in my life. So basically, until then, I was an entrepreneur for 22 years. My first company was a music business. As you can see, I actually had to escape I have 5 small kids, so I had to escape them from my study to this little studio I have here at home. So I still, dabble, and I'm a hobbyist, but for the first 10 years of my professional life, I would make like songs for stage recording artists and produce records for labels and do TV tunes. And I was a conductor at one of the biggest theaters for about a year when I was 24. And then I went back to school, got myself a PhD in theoretical philosophy, and started this second company, the Academy of Philosophy. Then I had a short-lived technology startup, started working also with this company called Rovio, who made the Angry Birds game. And then together with the founders of Rovio, we started this learning game company called Lightyear that I ran for about 2.5 years. And then eventually ended up here. And at AVP, our thinking is that we want to teach the mindset and capabilities of an entrepreneur to all Aalto students and all people involved in the Aalto community, which consists of roughly 20,000 people altogether. But more than that, we are now moving on to a new strategic period at the university, which is super exciting from the point of view of creativity, entrepreneurship, and especially on having a real impact in the world. Because basically, having worked in the startup ecosystem for several years and having been an entrepreneur for more than 2 decades, one thing that has really struck me is that basically, especially the startup ecosystem is full of these sort of grandiose, highbrow missions of saving the world, when in fact we are creating applications for rich Californians to get their matcha lattes faster. So basically, there's a huge discrepancy between what is an actual, real, positive net impact in the world and what startups say that they're doing. And actually, you might want to look this up, because today, Slush, the leading European technology conference, released a white paper about where the ecosystem is headed, and they actually underlined these themes of diversity, inclusion, and purpose through real impact as the sort of like the future of the startup ecosystem. And at Aalto, we have, I mean, Aalto, first of all, is at the heart of the Finnish startup ecosystem and the Finnish innovation ecosystem. And all of these phenomena you might have heard about, like Junction, Europe's biggest hackathon, or Slush, Europe's most important technology conference. All of these things have actually been started by our students. So Aalto, the first 10 years of the university, created this thriving ecosystem, and now moving forward to the next 10, we want to put this firepower to use as a force for good. So if we take a look at how the university is structured, so about 10 years, a little more than 10 years ago, our biggest art school, our biggest technology university, or University of Technology, and our biggest business school in Finland fused together to form Aalto University. So altogether, all these three universities have a background, I think, going all the way to late 19th century or thereabouts. But Aalto University, as it stands today, is roughly 10 years old. And the interesting thing, when I started working in this position, given my background as an entrepreneur, was that I realized that actually the very DNA of our university is perfectly suited for creating new startups. Because these three verticals that created this university, art, technology, and business, are precisely the thing that you need to have in the sort of ideal startup founder team. If you don't have understanding of art, philosophy, the sort of like the higher thinking there, you might end up just creating something very banal, very sort of like, everyday that nobody wants to buy. If you don't have technology, you can't really build a scalable business, which a startup needs to be without technology. And obviously, it goes without saying, if you want to start a business, understanding business might, be a good thing to have in the team. But what makes things even more exciting is that in addition to these three verticals that are perfectly suited for startup teams and that have already given rise to this, what I would venture to say is one of the most thriving startup ecosystems in the world, even compared, I would even say that we're not like Silicon Valley, we're actually even better than Silicon Valley, because the Finnish ecosystem is not hyper competitive the same way as the American ecosystem is, but rather hyper collaborative. So we have the same sort of go-getter mentality. We have our unicorns. We have, companies like Supercell that's valued, that's the only decacorn or company valued, unlisted company valued at 10 billion in Europe altogether. All of these companies have come from this, interaction with these three verticals. But on top of those, in our new strategy, we have also introduced three new horizontal functions, or what we call the strategic cross-cutting themes, who we are now starting to implement throughout the entire university, namely radical creativity, so the capability of really venturing outside the box and think about disruptive, new, useful, and radical ideas. Entrepreneurship, basically taking these three verticals and directing them to solve actual problems that a customer may have, and sustainability. So Aalto University has actually now recently, about a little less than a year ago, signed this UN SDG Accord, or Sustainable Development Goal Accord. So our university, the entire 20,000 people of Brainpower, is committed not only to act sustainably, but actually to put our brainpower to use to solve these pressing problems in the world, which leads to this phenomenon where we can actually we at AVP lift people from all of these three verticals. We build multidisciplinary, multi-dimensionally diverse teams out of them. We apply radical creativity to create sustainable innovations, specifically in the fields of the Sustainable Development Goals. And our vision at AVP is that roughly 10 years from now, these 20,000 heads of fantastic, phenomenal brainpower will have organized so that we have actually a sustainable development goal solving machine in our hands, which means in practice that we are able sustainably to give rise to new startups, out of whom some become financial successes through catering to some of the most pressing problems of the human race on the planet. So this is kind of I just wanted to give you a little bit of an idea of the direction we're headed from at Aalto, and especially at AVP, and also to give a little bit of background to the next actual topics of the philosophy of entrepreneurship and creativity. That is the topic at hand today.
Lauri, there was a question if you could go a little bit slower.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, I can't see the comment field. I don't know why I can't.
Yeah, it's in chat, but I tell, but it was if you a little bit slower.
Yeah. Let me see if I can. Okay, now I think I have the chat here. Yeah. Okay, nice. So if you have any questions, just don't hesitate to put them in the chat, and I'll try to grab them as we can. And yeah, I may up the pace a little bit when I get excited. So if you feel that I start going too fast again, don't hesitate to put in the chat like that dude slow down a little, whatever, and I'll definitely then do that. But that's that about Aalto University and ABP. And let's head on now to the actual topic at hand, which is philosophy of creativity and entrepreneurship. Now, the first question is like, why does any of this really matter? Why don't what do we need creativity for? Why do we need to have an entrepreneurial mindset? Can't we just get good day jobs and keep on doing whatever we're doing? And the problem is that right now, this spring, we have all tangibly seen how the world surprises us, how the world changes around us and pushes us into this new normal. So even before the Corona pandemic, we already were seeing signs of an accelerating pace in technology. So basically, technology is increasingly changing the way our markets, our financial markets, and our job markets change. And at the deep down, the reason to this is that technological change is driven by the pace and locality of information. So yet, 100, 200 years ago, information, aka ideas that could be applied into become, products that could then be sold to a market. Information was highly local and very slow. So that meant that, if you came up with a great idea and then, told it to 10 people, the idea might, in the scope of a year, maybe, reach the next city or thereabouts. If you made a book about that, printed a few hundred copies, you might be able to reach an adjacent country in a matter of months or years. But the pace was slow, ideas didn't combine together, and the reach, even at its very best, was quite low. Now compare that to the situation today, or even like 20 years ago. So now we have internet, we have hyper-connected globe, we have billions of people with mobile devices where if you have an idea, you can post it on Twitter right now, and 2 seconds later, somebody in, let's say, Australia may see that idea and go like, whoa, now I understand. And that might germinate into something like, some amazing new innovation in Australia. So basically, the way the information is now hyper global and hyper fast has created this phenomenon where new technologies, new solutions to problems, new ways of building companies arise at a more and more rapid pace, which feeds back into this equation. This is why we're seeing the exponential curve happening with technology. And what this means in practice is that our markets are going to change, what people want to buy, what people can sell, what people can produce, and our job markets are going to change. So what is going to be a viable job in 10 years from now? Actually, we think about that a lot at the university because we'd love to teach those things to our students that are going to be valuable in 10 years from now, but nobody knows. Nobody knows, not even like us, like the professors at the university, we have no idea what we should be teaching. I mean, should we teach coding to our students? I mean, we teach coding in a bunch of classes at Aalto. But I mean, the algorithms of 2030 may be written by algorithms. That's, actually a perfectly feasible, possibility. And if that were to happen, all of the coders that we educated would be not just out of jobs, but they wouldn't have, anymore the kind of capability of applying what they know in the job market. And this is why we need to change. We need to become more dynamic. We need to become more creative, and we need to become more entrepreneurial. What that means in practice that instead of trying to predict life, we try to look for opportunities every day and convert those opportunities into something tangible that we can innovate. A study in Oxford University from 2013 projected that roughly 47% of current jobs will be obsolete by 2030. There's been a bunch of studies since that pin that figure somewhere in the ballpark of 10 to 50%, but the great majority of those papers are more closer to the 50%, which gives us a pretty strong position to venture to say that, first of all, in the 2030s, roughly 50% of the jobs out there right now are extinct. And in their place, there are jobs whose names nobody knows right now. One example, because I used to run a games company. So one example I often use is that the job position of a free-to-play mobile game data analyst did not exist yet another 10 years ago. Free-to-play games are now the older rage. If you go to the top charts in iOS or Android, free-to-play games are the ones that make billions of dollars out there. And they make billions of dollars because they are based in a very intricate earnings model that is driven by very skilled data analysts employed by these companies. Without the analysts, they wouldn't make a dime. And this position, which would have been total gibberish yet another 10 years ago, is one of the most coveted. These people in this position are some of the most coveted employees by games companies, and they're willing to pay an arm and a leg to get a great analyst to work for them, and they'll even fly them from all the way from the other side of the planet, give them a nice car and a nice house if they want to come and join these companies. So this is an example, like just one single example of the types of changes that are happening in our world. And in order to tackle these changes, we need to be more creative. We need the entrepreneurial mindset. We need to be able to work more dynamically, to be able to work in a world which cannot be predicted. On top of this exponential change, there's the even nastier phenomenon that Nassim Taleb, the famous author, calls the black swan. So black swan is in effect event like the corona pandemic that is very difficult to predict, but that has massive consequences. Well, I mean, we all tangibly know now what a black swan is after the experiences of the recent couple of months. And due to this, even more emphatically, we now need the type of mindset where whenever a big rock comes our way, we don't shy away from it, but we actually see it as an opportunity, as many startups actually have done in this corona pandemic. We even had a bunch of students who got stranded in, well, not a bad place to get stranded in, but they got stranded in Hawaii. So we'd sent them to UC Berkeley University in the West Coast US, and they had been taking a break in Hawaii. Then the lockdown came down to the US and they were stranded there. So instead of pursuing their original startup idea, they pivoted overnight and started this logistics optimization startup because they realized that people are having a hard time getting things like masks and hand sanitizer to be able to navigate the corona situation. So the other example from close to us is that when the pandemic started, Junction, Europe's biggest hackathon, which is run by autonomously by our students, organized almost overnight this 2-day hackathon where students spent hour on top of hour coming up with new solutions to problems related to the corona crisis. So these are examples of where, even though when we're challenged by something as daunting and as difficult as the corona crisis, with the creative mind and the entrepreneurial mindset, we can navigate even a crisis of this magnitude and perhaps even convert them into opportunities, which I think is kind of cool, actually. So now, how can we actually learn to think more dynamically? How can we learn to think more creatively? And at the core of that is understanding what creativity is and how does it reach out to all of us. So the creative process is not a straightforward process where you just sit down and start to create. First of all, creativity is something that it's something that's been debated over hundreds of years or even millennia about what is creativity to begin with. The textbook definition for creativity nowadays is often some variation of what Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, the famous flow professor from Claremont Graduate University, describes in his book from 1997 called Creativity. And he defines creativity as the capability to make something that is new and useful according to some group of experts or peers. So it has to be new, but new alone isn't enough. If I broke down the place, that would be something, new, but not really useful. It has to be useful, but then useful to who? And this is what Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi solves by ascribing that usefulness to some group of experts in a field or domain. So that's one way to look at that. But I even actually bumped into something even more exciting in terms of definition a couple of months ago when I participated in this online course by Stanford University and their wonderful professor of practice, Tina Seelig, about creativity. And she defined creativity as applied imagination, where imagination is defined by being able to think about what doesn't exist. So you think about something that doesn't exist and you apply that to whatever is at your hand, and that is creativity. And this, I think, is another way of taking a look at that. What does it mean to be able to do things creatively? And there's a lot of stubborn myths about what creativity is and isn't. And often people tend to think that people can be split into these creative and uncreative people, and that is totally false. We wrote a book with my younger brother, who's a renowned ad designer and film director here in Finland. And basically, the main thesis of the book is that there are no divisions between creative and uncreative people because everybody is creative. Every living being has the capability of doing things in a new way if the old way doesn't work. But the reason why where we often think that these Da Vinci's and like Edison's and I don't know, Steven Spielberg's and Mozart's and whatnot are creative, and then some other people aren't, is that there is a methodological dimension to creativity. So it's a little similar situation to that creativity is a basic human skill that is kind of like walking or talking. But even though we all can walk and talk and be creative, not everybody can walk like an Olympic athlete. Like there's an actual sport of Olympic walking, right? Not everybody can talk like Winston Churchill. And not everybody can create like Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, because we haven't learned the methods and the tools that you need to apply to be able to navigate creativity. And now, before, I actually want to share some of those tools that we found with my brother to be very useful throughout our careers in various fields. But before we go there, I wanted to share first this model of like how the creative process works. So creativity is this sort of like kind of a breathing motion between two highly different types of thinking, which are called divergent thinking, or kind of like deconstructive thinking, and convergent thinking, or focusing thinking. There's a bunch of, in the literature, there's a bunch of ways to model this. In design thinking, there's the very famous double diamond model, where you first open up and generate ideas in divergent thinking. Then you focus down and come up with some ideas that are like feasible suggestions. Then you open up again, and then you focus down, and the end result is the final design. But there's a bunch of these things. You don't have to do the double diamond, although it's a pretty good model as it stands. But one thing to keep in mind, though, is that creative thinking is almost never straightforward. So you have to actually go back and forth between the kind of like divergent and convergent thinking. And then the interesting thing is that, first of all, if you work in a team, one of the big challenges in teamwork is that, first of all, people tend to have, leanings towards being more divergent or convergent in their thinking. There are even personality tests that can, x-ray this, whether you are more sort of like kind of idea generator and divergent, or more like, kind of like promoter and producer or convergent, like, getting things done at a rapid pace. And then these types of people often clash because the divergently thinking people find the convergent people boring and dull and sort of like accountant-like. And then the convergent people find divergent people unpredictable and annoying and spontaneous and like really hard to work with. And then the other challenge in working with a team is that often, if we haven't explicitly stated that we are in a divergent or the convergent phase, people might clash on just assuming that they're doing different things. So let's assume, for example, that we at AVP are creating a new entrepreneurial course. And a bunch of the people involved in creating that course come to the room assuming that we're in the divergent phase. So we just start shooting out ideas and doing diagrams on the whiteboard and whatnot. But then a bunch of us think that, hey, we should have the first date for the first lecture. We should have a lecture structure. So they're thinking convergently, and the other ones are thinking divergently, and this leads to a clash. So if you want to navigate this landscape, both as an individual and as a team, you should first of all understand where you fall in terms of your temperament, because that's probably if you're divergent people, you probably have a better skill set from the get-go. And if you're working by yourself, it might make more sense to learn also convergent tools. But then the other thing is that if you're working in a team, to understand that often divergent, these kind of rock star people like to hang together, and convergent or these kind of executive or accountant people like to hang together. And to be able to understand that you actually both need each other. You need both kinds of thinking, and the strongest teams are diverse teams also in terms of temperament. So if you have a team that has good balance of divergent and convergent thinking, I think that team's likelihood of success is way higher than if everybody was convergent, which would just lead on to the same old, or if everybody was divergent, which would just break up the whole process into chaos. And then one last thing is that getting to a finished work, getting a product out the door, getting an idea, really sort of finalized, requires movement between the two ends. And the double diamond model is a great model, but it actually only involves two divergent and two convergent phases, at least in its basic form. And you might have to realize that even after you've done several iterations or revisions of your work, you might have to go back to being divergent and tear it all open. And if you're writing a book, you might have to you'd feel that it's almost there, but then you'd reshuffle all the chapters and it would become something totally different. And then you'd start zoning in on that new different thing again. Now, one thing that I found really useful. So my interest in creativity actually started when I started writing my PhD dissertation thesis. And I had a huge problem in the beginning because I was looking at this huge white Microsoft Word screen, and everything I wrote felt like total BS. I had just spent half a year writing my master's thesis, produced these 120 pages of text, and I was totally depleted of ideas. And whenever I started writing something, it just felt stupid. So I had this, what is a very famous phenomenon for creative people. So basically, So this phenomenon that is called the writer's block. That was, by the way, a kind of interesting performative block that happened right there. So basically, I had this writer's block, and I couldn't think about what to put in the paper. And then I went to Amazon and just Googled creativity and basically ordered the first 5 books that came. Miha Csikszentmihalyi's book that I mentioned was actually one of those books that I ordered that day. I read the books and started realizing that there are these generalities about creativity. And furthermore, when I started looking back to my work as a music producer and composer, and I realized that these generalities I had actually intuitively been doing in my work, even when I didn't know that was the case. So then I started, meticulously studying biographies of people like Da Vinci and Edison and Hemingway and Steve Jobs and whatever, and just trying to understand what are these generalities. And what turns out is that there's a bunch of tools or methods that most of these people that we think about as creative geniuses have either intuitively or explicitly using their works. And I would love to share now some of these tools with you next. So, throughout analyzing these different methods and methodologies, I came up with this sort of 5-step path to creativity. Now, keep in mind, once again, this graph. So it's not you start with divergent phases and you go to drafting and then refining and finalizing. I actually go back and forth here and there and and make little loops to get to the end result. So basically, whenever you run into a block anytime in the past, you can either try to move to the next phase or go back to the previous phase. And that way you'll actually, I don't remember having had a writer's block in 10 years, which is kind of crazy. But it's true, like, that when you learn these tools, then it's very easy, and I'll explain to you right in a bit why that actually happens. And it's very easy to to actually do a lot of creative work if you want to do things like that. So I think the best by far way to battle writer's block or any creative block is to collect ideas. So basically, the first phase in any creative process is to start just collecting random stuff. Everybody has ideas, but one of the things that struck me that really changed my habits a lot when I was reading those biographies was that almost every single one of these so-called creative geniuses was a vehement, really passionate note taker. Everybody has ideas. We are walking down the street and something pops into our heads and we go, whoa, that's interesting. But if we don't write that idea down right then and there, it might evaporate. Actually, it often does evaporate for good. Now, if you think about creativity as applied imagination, your imagination is at work, it drops an idea in front of you. But if you don't post that idea somewhere, you will never have the chance to apply that imagination and therefore use it for creative endeavor. So if you want to really spike up your creativity, I think one thing will almost 100% guaranteed destroy the writer's block in your life. The first, you keep a notebook wherever you go. Actually, even literally went and bought waterproof paper that I put in my shower because I wanted to be able that even when I'm taking a shower in the morning, that if something pops in my head, we used to have these fights with my wife because the floor started getting wet and everything because I would rush out of the shower without toweling myself up and write stuff in my notebook. So I got this waterproof paper and you could actually write, I can now write the ideas there if they come to me in the shower. So carry a notebook wherever you go, have it always with you because it's still sometimes I may forget the notebook and then I actually use my cell phone for this these days. But back in the day when it was still a physical book and if I would forget it, and the whole feeling all evening long I was maybe in a party with my friends and I would be so worried that if I get a great idea that how can I write it down? So that's one step. But then the other step is that when you've collected enough material, you also put them in some repository, some place where you're sure to find them. There's a legend about Thomas Edison that he left behind roughly 5 million pages of notes. This much we know, but the legend is that he could actually access any single one of those notes in the span of just a couple of minutes. Now let that sink in for a minute. We're talking about the late 19th century, early 20th century. No computers, no technology, just pen and paper, maybe some typewriting, I don't know. And 5 million notes and you could access whatever is in there in a matter of minutes. And what you need for that is an archiving system. But for us, we don't need to be on an Edison level of meticulousness of archiving in our notes because we have tools at our disposal in our cell phones. We have a lot of great archiving tools. And what I really love as a tool is this thing called Evernote. So Evernote is my sort of go-to archive, and I have more than 20,000 notes in my Evernote from the last 12 years or so. And I can still, let's say that I was in the World Congress of Positive Psychology in Los Angeles in 2013, and if somebody reminded me of, let's say a talk by Martin Seligman at that event, it would take me probably 45 seconds maximum to dig out my lecture notes from Martin Seligman's talk 7 years ago. So I have almost this kind of extended mind or extended memory, and it's actually funny because that's almost how it feels. And if I don't have access to my Evernote, it feels like that my IQ goes down at least 20 notches, and my memory, I become almost Alzheimer-like. And I experienced this very strongly a couple of weeks ago when I was teaching this methodology to our team at AVP. And in order to teach the Evernote like practicalities, I had to start a new account with 0 notes. So I had to log out of my own account and log into this new username so that I could show our team how it actually how it is built from the ground up, which meant that all that morning I didn't have access to my Evernote, and I felt like I'm so stupid because I can't remember these things that I normally remember because I can just pick out my mobile phone or my iPad or my computer and just get down to it. So if you really want to start developing creative methodologies, the place where I advise people to start with is taking notes and starting to use something like Evernote, some archiving system where all of your ideas go to, so that when you actually start to create the new work, you can go to that archive and dig out the stuff that you've accumulated there so far and get to work. And for example, when we started working on our new book on creativity that was published in Finnish in January, what we did with my brother was that we went to my Evernote, chose all of the notes that had the tag creativity to them, printed out roughly 250 items of those notes, which were just random ideas that I might have had walking down the street in 2015 or whatever. And then we chopped them up into these little like I called it our little psychopath wall thing, and then we put them on table and glued them to this piece of paper. And by the evening, we had already the basic structure of the book ready, when in the morning we had nothing. So this is why I say this stuff really can fight writer's block for good. Now, if you go to the creativity tools, so basically you can roughly put them in 5 categories. The first one is collecting, and you should always start there, because if you rush to drafting, you'll be dealing with the writer's block more often than not. In addition to the notebook habit, there's a bunch of other ways, you can brainstorm with your friends, do stuff like that. But often when people ask me, what is the most important tool for a creative person? In addition to notebook, I would say read a lot and travel as much as you can. And when I say travel as much as you can, right now with the COVID-19, not a great piece of advice. But even though you can, travel to, I don't know, the forest nearby or a park nearby, you can just start looking at trees in a different way, taking photographs and making notes about them. You can use a VR headset to travel virtually to even to another planet. So just you need new stuff in your sort of brain system if you want to be able to create new stuff. And reading and traveling are some of the best ways of doing that. And then if you top that with note taking, so if you ever come to visit me at my place, I have this big library filled with books that are all full of little scribbles, because you can also make notes inside the books, which is I think quite amazing. So that's the way you can create this repository of new ideas. Then when you have a collection of ideas, in order to choose what to work with, like I said, you should put them in an archive like Evernote or something else, and then revisit them often. Excuse me. And so what I often do also is that for example, for my musical ideas, actually I have a different system for musical ideas. So when I'm in the studio, I might just make some chord progression or play the guitar a little or do some drum beats. And then every now and then I go through all of those little clippets that I've done. And then I often sort them some of these things actually, build into songs, so they become actual fully fledged songs. But some of this stuff I feel that's just kind of not, the quality is not good enough. So I have this, what I call the scratch pile. And I throw a lot of stuff into the scratch pile, and that stuff never becomes, the songs they were intended to be with. But even that stuff may become something totally new. And this is what happened to me about a month and a half ago. So I was writing a remix for this artist, American artist, I think she's actually Canadian, called Grimes, who's probably best known right now as the girlfriend of Elon Musk, the Tesla and SpaceX guy. So I was working on this remix for this amazing female vocalist and tried to figure out that how to make that work, and nothing really stuck together. So then I went to my scratch file and I took this 4-bar riff of a song that really it really sucked, to be honest. But then I loaded it into a sampler and chopped it up into these little bits, and I started playing with those bits, and they became the beat for that song, and that song actually became pretty cool, to be honest. At the end of the day, without that thing in my scratch file, if I hadn't done that, piece of music that sucked back in the day, I wouldn't have been able to use it as a part of the remix, and that remix wouldn't exist. So when you're selecting stuff, I mean, you should like do categorizations about them, but don't throw anything away permanently, because even the stuff that you think is trash right now may be gold later. Then when you have stuff that you've collected and you've created this categorization of, then you can start crafting. And like I said, I mean, I've written 7 books, so most of those books have actually started with me opening a new screen and copy pasting whatever I have collected in Evernote. So I would have, I think the best case was when I wrote this book called Learning as Fun in 2012, about like game learning and the future of schools. And I actually started writing the book in the morning when I stepped on a train to Tampere, which takes about 2 hours. So when I left that day, I had 0 pages and a blank page in the Word. But I had, at that point already accumulated a ton of ideas about how learning works, how the brain processes information. I just started copy pasting that into the Word. And by the time I got back home in the evening, like through these 2-hour train trips, so it took 4 hours altogether, I had more than 100 pages of raw material for that book. And starting to write from 100 pages is a totally different ballgame than starting to write from 0. So when you start drafting, use the material you've accumulated. And then the other thing, that's very important in drafting is that, I mean, the draft is the first love of the creative process. It's when you see, the thing shaping up and it starts to feel like, this might actually become something. It's a couple of key things to keep in mind. When you're drafting, just try to create as much of material as possible and don't edit at that point. Don't really spend much time to edit. I even got this, I don't know if you can see that thing on the table. So that's my little writing corner. It's called a free write. It's a really spectacular piece of equipment because you can't edit anything you write on that. The only way you can go back to something you've written is by deleting everything on a backspace, like with a typewriter back in the day. And that's a phenomenal way of writing, a piece of paper, for example, that you just have to go forward. And that's what you should do in the crafting phase. But then the other problem with drafting is that, in addition to us starting to twiddle with too many edits, with drafting we also tend to stick there. So that's what differentiates amateurs from the pros, is that you sort of don't stick with the draft, but you also refine it. So when you go to the refining phase, you start editing it, really refining, polishing it up, keeping it as simple as possible, but not simpler. And killing all of those, kill your darlings, all of those individual things that don't fit into the whole, even though they as individuals might seem quite compelling. And finally, to put on a finishing touch, at some point you simply need to stop. It's kind of like this poet Paul Valery once said that a piece of art is never finished, only at last abandoned. So you need to abandon your work at some point, and to do that, sleep over it, just sleep one night or one week or whatever, then come back to it and give it one finishing touch, but not more. You'll always want to tweak that stuff if you give yourself permission. And the worst case scenario is that you'll end up with something like the present day versions of Star Wars, where George Lucas, who created the masterpiece in 1977, has gradually tweaked it into something more resemblant of some zombie or Frankenstein monster with all of those digital edits. So it's in the end, put one touch on that and then let it be. And this I wanted to just share with you, this sort of creative process and methodology that I found very, very useful in my own work. Unfortunately, the creativity book is available only in Finnish, but if you read Finnish, then you should look it up. I think Kari posted the link there into the comments. Now, creativity is great, but if we really want to navigate this changing social phenomenon, we need to put it to work. And that means that we need to develop and engender the entrepreneurial mindset. It's only a couple of weeks ago when I realized, because we've been at the university, we've been trying to figure out what is the entrepreneurial mindset for years actually. And a couple of weeks ago, it really struck me that the best way to define, because an entrepreneur isn't somebody who starts a company. You can also be what we call an intrapreneur. So you can act in an entrepreneurial way, but inside your day job. So the entrepreneur is actually defined best by the way we relate to problems. Now, the corporate way to think about problem is to try to avoid them as much as we can. So stick to routines, stick to your old ways of doing, and try to avoid problems. Don't make mistakes if you can. Whereas an entrepreneur, when they see a problem, they go, interesting. I mean, like, with how many businesses are born is that a person with an entrepreneurial mindset gets upset about something. They get peeved, like, why is this done in such a stupid way? Hasn't anybody really solved this? And an entrepreneur goes towards a problem rather than away from the problem. And we go towards the problem armed with radical creativity, armed with innovation, armed with the capability of doing something that nobody has ever done before yet, but that we can be the first pioneers of doing. And in so doing, if we put applied imagination to use, applying creativity to serve a customer base by solving a problem that's a real problem for them. If we do that, that means that we all are also inevitably going to fail. And the entrepreneurial way of thinking about failure is not to find the guilty party or the scapegoat first, but the entrepreneurial way of dealing with failure is actually to try to think about, like, what went wrong, what can I learn from this, and what can I do differently next time. A great example of how this is done in practice is the Finnish company Supercell. I mentioned them already, valued at some point like over $10 billion, which is crazy. They produced 5 games. They make about $2 billion of revenue every year, like almost $1 billion of profit, and they only employ 300 people. And how is this possible? Because they have been able to capitalize on their failures. So they have been able to really, like, double down and create a meticulous process that whenever they kill a game, which they've killed dozens of, they analyze what went wrong, why that game didn't work on the level that it did, and ultimately these learnings are shared with every single employee of the company, which means that the company, even if they fail, they learn, and when they learn, they become better, and when they become better, they can solve these problems of creating world-class, amazing free-to-play games better and better every year. And this is the entrepreneurial mindset that you can actually put to use by going at a problem, trying to solve it the best you can, solving in this quick iterative manner, which leads me to the final point for the talk today, namely the Eric Ries lean startup model, which I think is like, not just an entrepreneurial model, but something that we could actually like bring into our entire lives. So instead of thinking that we need to create, the perfect product and like refine it and like spend years in the laboratory or in the writing chamber or whatever, like, creating that thing, we should create something that's, good enough, something that's, almost still like, the draft really, and then bring that, or Eric Ries talks about this minimum viable product. Like Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, he once, like, famously said that like, if you aren't embarrassed about your product when you launch it, you're too late. So you need to build something, then push it to the customer, push it to the market, and then measure what happens. This is what's great about, like, game development, that with games we know these like 2 or 3 metrics or parameters that we need to get right if we want to make money with the game. Basically retention, conversion, and the customer acquisition cost. And if we get this balance of these things right, you can make even $1 billion from one single mobile game. Now we need to have some metrics to measure the performance of our product. And now, if we are at the level that we want to be, great. Let's launch. Let's bring in the pomp and circumstance. Often we're not in the first phase because we're launching early. So we learn from the metrics. We build further. We measure. We learn. We build. We measure. We learn. And this very same principle can also be applied in our everyday lives to navigate these black swans, to navigate these exponential technological progress. Namely, we can also do this type of activities in our everyday life by applying the entrepreneurial mindset, by applying the creativity, by doing something, seeing what happens, learning from that what happened, and if it didn't work, doing something differently. And most emphatically, whenever we fail, we should take a deep breath, sit down, and do some kind of an analysis, like write it down. Supercell, actually, the team lead gives a presentation to the entire company about what went wrong. You can do that by writing it into your diary or having a kind of a post-mortem session with your team or whatever. But make sure you have a system of pumping out the learnings from when you fail, both as a team, as an organization, or as an individual. And if we're able to apply creativity in our everyday lives, in our works, in our organizations, if we're able to not try to avoid problems, but identify them and go towards them to solve them with the entrepreneurial mindset, then this, the whole world that's kind of, becoming crazier and crazier every day doesn't become a threat to us, but a wonderland of opportunities. And this way, what we're thinking about adult university, when you take a look at the 17 sustainable development goals that yet 10, 15 years ago, people thought that couldn't be solved at all. And now we're seeing like absolute poverty cutting half of what it used to be 15 years ago. We're seeing massive progress there. And armed with creativity and entrepreneurial mindset, I'm 100% certain that we can start solving these most pressing problems of the humankind and really create a kind of world where we can all really feel like, creating new stuff, making awesome stuff happen, and making the world better in so doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lauri. That was impressive once again. So are there some questions now from the audience? I see that there are comments.
Yes, today we have a lot of comments, and I see that many people want to ask questions.
If you can moderate it, Olga, so that
I can read these questions, but I think the people are in the room now and they can discuss it. The most part of questions are from Vladimir. Vladimir, do you want to add something? I see that you would like to communicate.
Yeah, and my questions are not just questions, but mostly notes that can be converted to questions. And first of all, I'm very interested if there's opinion that creativity can help us to handle black swans situation and as the lecturers think, can creativity be our tool to prevent